Oh, hey, I guess it's about time for another Heresy Hump Day. Hey everybody, it's been a while. I apologize, but for those of you that follow the channel, I've kind of been around lately. I've not done this format in a while, and it's not going away. And I am back to do another Heresy Hump Day. Got a little bit of a different setup here, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment during the table update. But I've got a regular format Heresy Hump Day today. I guess I'll do the sponsored drink today, and we'll do a bit of a table update / hobby room kind of thing, as well as big topics today are the Papillon 2017 review. For those of you that are not new to Heresy Hump Days, I occasionally will do movies that I'm interested in, and this one I've done the original 1973 classic with Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman. I've already done. I'll maybe put a link below in the description if you're interested in seeing that, where I review that movie. But I had the opportunity to see the 2017 remake of the film, or new film, and I'd like to give my thoughts on it today. As well, another big topic will be hobby time management in reference to our hobby. So without further ado, let's take a look at the sponsored drink this evening. Today, I have something that has actually been on the channel before as a sponsor multiple times. It is kind of getting towards the beginning of Scotch drinking season, whiskey drinking season. It's a bit chilly here. Believe it or not, we've had our first snow in Calgary. And so what I have is Woodford Reserve. It's a bourbon that I quite like. And I was just sort of in the mood for it. I wasn't going to be trying something new on the show tonight. And so I have a little bit of bourbon just to sip on during the show. I'll have my first sip here. Always a good one. I always enjoy that one. And so that's great. So what we'll do first, I think, is we'll just go to the table update.
Hey everybody, so for this Heresy Hump Day, my table update is, I don't have anything finished at the moment. For those of you that have been watching the channel, you'll know that I just finished a group of Eldar for the Musty Wargamers Old Hammer Challenge, and I've got my next group here where I'm just sort of finishing some of the first layers of base paint, so they're not looking that great at the moment because it's just getting that first layer of base paint on. But I'm kind of working away at this stage, and I find this stage for me to be some of the longest stuff, is getting just that initial paint on everywhere and the way I want to. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. But what I thought I would share a little bit today is just some of the changes I've had on my painting table. And something's going on my painting table where I will kind of hint at it in our last topic today, or give the answers to what it was. But essentially, I've done a bit of a room reorganization a little bit. Since the last time I've done a video, I guess, to Musty Wargamers, because I've had some finishing done in my hobby room where I had a new window put in, so I had to move some shelving back, and then I've got something going on my hobby desk pretty soon that's required a big shake-up in my hobby room. So here I have my normal, my spot here that I've got for my painting. Now, to the right here, I used to have a paint rack. Now what I have more is a bit of a staging area, and this is sort of stuff that is in the queue to paint. So I've got some Epic here that I'm working on that I still have to do, like the base and stuff there. I have some command stand here that I'm just finishing up on the flag. I've got some warhounds that have to be painted. Some other things, like some other finishing things with Epic. I've got my windmill there that I'll be doing, and I've got the coach that I showed in a video for Musty Wargamers behind it that I'll be doing. For more black powder stuff. I've got more pressing. I've got 2 dreadnoughts I'll be painting during the Musty Wargamers Old Hammer Challenge. I also magnetized these. I stripped these down, and these are for Epic. They're not painted, so it's not, I apologize. It's not showing that per se, but I did actually magnetize these little bombers that I've got. I think they're Marauder bombers. And so I got a couple of those, which I was really happy with how they took to the magnets. I've got some Twilight here that'll be coming up eventually to be able to do my scenario for Twilight. But more importantly, I'll be doing the big push. I don't know exactly how I'll be doing all the orders of these projects. These are my next things I'm doing. But the big push to get done, and the thing I'm really focused on, is Saga. Because I have been playing Saga. I've played 2 games in the last couple of weeks, and I'm really enjoying Saga, and I want to try a new army, and I want to paint up my Scots. So that will be a big deal coming up shortly. But as far as other areas of my command station here in the Heresy Lounge, this used to contain a paint rack. My camera, you'll notice that, you've noticed probably already that I'm in a little bit of a different angle today in my shot as far as this video, because I used to have a camera there shooting at me. So I have something that's going there that's going to take up some room. And then I've got the camera that I use for all this stuff. Sorry, here. And my rest of my desk, I have like another little paint area or hobby area there. And then my sort of workstation. And so yeah, I've really done a big job to sort of clear a lot of room off and put all the other stuff I had in shelves and things. So that's my sort of table update. Nothing as far as on the table, too much progress just since the last video. But it takes me a lot of time even to get to this spot sometimes with base painting. Base painting, to get it the way you want, I find to be sometimes the slowest stage. So, all right, well, back to the chat.
Okay, well, first topic for the evening is going to be the Papillon 2017 review. This is a movie that was available, I believe, at Sundance to see. Not this fall, but last fall. And I'd really been wanting to see it. I wasn't sure when it was going to be available in an actual theater release. Here in Calgary, it was on for a couple of weeks at least, and it just very quickly dropped off. It's just not a highly promoted film. It's not something I've seen reviews on TV or promotion on TV for. I don't think it got a tremendous showing. There were a number of times during the day to see it when it first came out, but when I eventually, just within 2 weeks, got to see it, I saw it at like 10 p.m. at night, the late showing, and I was one of 3 people in the theater, so it was, pretty not well marketed sort of release. But for those of you that have watched the original review, or I should say for those that haven't, I'll just quickly mention that I am a longtime fan of the story of Papillon. It is based somewhat loosely on a true story. How loosely is probably debatable, but regardless of that historical fact, I am really a big fan. Like the movie in the 1973, I believe it came out in December of 1973. I was born in February of that year. Probably much later, like when I was in high school, I probably became a fan of the film, and I've watched it for probably 35 years, I'm guessing. Somewhere in there, 30 to 35 years, pretty consistently. So much so that I ended up reading the book when I went to Hawaii as reading material. I just kind of burned through the book and really enjoyed it. The actual kind of biography of the individual that plays the character Papillon. And I really enjoyed the book. Having said that, the book was very different from the original film. Right off the bat, the individual in the book, I believe, was in his early 20s. So I believe he was between 21 and 23, the character within the book. Whereas Steve McQueen, that played him, was in his early 40s when he played the role. Right off the bat there, that's going to change some things in the way the character's perceived, because you can't take 2 decades and just not acknowledge there's a difference. Like, there's going to be a difference in the way that that story plays out and how the part is portrayed. And so, having watched the movie first, I mean, I completely give the movie a pass in the sense that I was already a fan. But looking at the book had a lot more time and pages, dedicated to lots of adventures that you don't see within the actual film, that are not extrapolated upon. And then also, just quickly before I get to the current movie, I would just say that one of the things I noticed at the time is that there wasn't really a tremendous amount of effort in building relationships with Papillon that lasted through the whole book. The book was really about Papillon, his escape from really the French Guiana, Devil's Island, like his escape in multiple attempts and his life of imprisonment, wrongfully, and just, it was this big adventure. The movie, really original classic, does still narrow it down quite a bit from that, and in the original movie, they really do focus a lot on Papillon and the relationship with the main supportive character, Dega. And that is played by Dustin Hoffman. And that sort of bond is a huge part of the film. I would say it's not nearly as a huge part of the original book from what I remember of it. Now, having said that, I only read the book once. It was like 500 pages. I read it once, really enjoyed it, where I've watched the film many times, the classic. So, when looking into, just a couple of things here. I mentioned the new film is Papillon's played by Charlie Hunnam, and Rami Malek plays Dega. Directed by Michael Noir. I'm not familiar with Michael Noir's work. If I've seen anything, I wasn't aware. And as far as the actors that were in this film, I've seen Lost City of Zed or Z, that has Charlie Hunnam, and I guess he's been in some other things in supportive roles that I've seen in the past. But to be honest, he never really stuck out as an actor to me, like in the sense of I didn't have any problems with his work, but I just wouldn't have known his name actually if you'd actually mentioned him to me, just because somebody has to be a pretty big star for me to even know their name. Like I'm not a big name person. I'm more of a face person to begin with. Now, Rami Malek actually had stood out to me as a really great upcoming actor over the last couple of years. In particular, he was in a Netflix favorite of mine where I was stumbling through looking for a movie to watch, and occasionally I find a real gem, not based on anybody's sort of recommendation, but just stumble upon it. And there was a movie called Buster's Malheart. I may or may have not mentioned it on the channel. It's very much a cerebral film, very much a trying to figure out exactly what you're watching, very artistic film, and he's the lead role within it. And I became a fan instantly when I saw it. Now, he also is going to be playing Freddie Mercury in the upcoming Bohemian Rhapsody film, the sort of biography of Freddie Mercury. And it looks excellent, and it looks like I think he was a great choice. And I was highly anticipating his involvement with this film, to play Dega in Papillon. When I was really excited about this to come out to begin with, but when I saw him playing Dega, I was even more excited. I thought that was excellent. So I had a lot of high hopes in that. Now, one of the things I just mentioned is I think the casting of those two was a really good choice in a lot of ways. I thought just because of the quality of the acting I've seen from Rami Malek and just his ability to take on interesting roles, he was a really good choice for Dega. And the other thing I would just say is I think it was a really good idea one good change was to try a younger actor closer to what the character was in the book at 21, 23. Like I know Charlie Hunnam, I don't know his exact age. I'm guessing he's in his early 30s. I don't really know for sure. but he definitely looks younger than Steve McQueen was when he played him at like 42 in the 70s. And so that was an opportunity to try something different and to portray the character slightly different. So I thought that was really good. Anytime you have a really big classic film that you love, that you're a really big fan of, oftentimes, it may be illogical, but oftentimes you'll see on the net and people saying like, "Oh, don't ruin the film. Like, it doesn't need to be remade." Like, you'll see that kind of sometimes that negativity bubble up. Particularly when people are really wed to a particular film. And I had to ask myself this question because, like, the moment I saw that a new one was coming out, I immediately was like, before I knew anything about it, I'm like, do I like this or not? And it was pretty quickly for me to say that I like it because I kind of embrace this fact that I can always watch the original. It's nothing takes away from the film for me. And so being able to watch the original. And so really, this is just a great opportunity in my mind to see a film that either takes a direction on the original book or a new take on the old classic film, really 35 years, or when actually in this case, 44 years later, 45 years later. And so really a lot has changed in the last 45 years. So that's excellent. It's giving attention to a great story in the current time. And so I only really saw it as opportunity. And so I've really been waiting to see this. Like, the only reason I found out it even came out in the theater is because somebody I knew, when I'd mentioned the film to them, they weren't even aware of it, had looked in their sort of listings and what's coming out in theaters at the end of the summer, and it happened to have it in there. And that's the only way I found out to even look for it. And so I was really excited to see it. One of the biggest questions, and I kind of already alluded to this, coming into this film that I asked myself was, is this a reinterpretation of the book in current times with a new director, or is this just a remake of a classic film? And I kind of was curious as to which one of those it was going to lean towards. In retrospect, after watching the film and seeing the director and some of the actors talk about the film, supposedly they use both as a source for the film, both the book as well as the current film. After watching the film, and I should say, if you've never watched either film, there's going to be spoilers in this. And so if you really want to watch it from the beginning without anything, you may not want to watch this. But as with most of my movie reviews, I won't be giving specific spoilers. Like, there won't be anything that reveals specific things in the plot. However, having said that, it is a story that's already been done. So if you've seen the first movie, there's nothing too much to spoil on the ending and things like that, because it is basically based on subject matter already done. Now, the question of it being closer to the book or closer to the original movie, clearly it's closer to the original movie. It, to me, is a remake of the film from the 1970s. It's no more a interpretation of the book than the original film was, and if anything, I would say that it follows the path of the original film so closely in certain aspects that it's more of a remake of a film than it is a reinterpretation of the book. Now, I mentioned some things in the beginning where the first film veers or doesn't focus like the book does. Well, in the same way, this film is really even more so trying to show a relationship between the character Papillon and Dega and really highlight that. In some of the things I've seen by the director afterwards, I mean, they highlight that as the main part of the story. I would argue that based on the book, it's not. That if you consider the movie as the source, the original classic film, then I agree. But I think that's where the original film veered from the book. And so this one really follows the path of the original film in trying to highlight that relationship. I'll talk about pros, and these are in no order of importance, but because this film is done in current day, 45 years, certain things are enhanced. Now, your fight choreography and action scenes is definitely much better than it was in the early 1970s. We were still pretty close to, like, I would call it the Cowboys in Space phenomenon, where on Star Trek they're fighting exactly the way they were on Gunsmoke. Like, it's very similar. It's before Bruce Lee came in on the scene as during the Green Hornet, like, and started changing lots, and other folks changing lots in the cinemas and introducing martial arts and a lot better choreography. And so you really see that, like, there is much better action from that perspective. So that's definitely a positive. I would say that the performance by Charlie Hunnam was much better than I expected. I wasn't a huge fan of the Lost City of Zed, so coming into this one, I just didn't really know what to expect. I liked the way he embraced the role. I thought he did a really good job. And overall, like, I really was sort of appreciated the way he did the role. I didn't sort of kind of cast him in Steve McQueen's shadow and think, like, this isn't nearly as good. Like, I thought he did a good job. And so for that perspective, I thought it was positive. Another positive thing about the film is that if you're a really big fan of the classic, which this one very much emulates, it does have some really nice segues, whether it be during the prison confinement and his dealing with that and some of the way the events happen within prison. They actually make some significant segues that are new, and so if you're watching this and you're a big fan already, you'll notice differences, and you'll say, oh, okay, so they kind of interpreted that a little differently, and they did this different than there. And I like that. I'm not one of those folks that kind of thinks, oh, it's got to be set in stone. I quite like that, actually. Another thing that is different than the original film is, in addition to the prison sequence, is also the way they actually use supportive characters. Other than Dega in the film, there's a number of other individuals that sort of interact within the story. And I would say that there were some major changes, really different than the original film. And in some cases, they're the same individual played by a very different type of actor and with a very different kind of role. And in some cases, doing things that were done by different individuals, but in this film, done by them. And so they reimagined it. And I liked that because, I can watch the classic anytime, but it's great to see something different. Neither one of them were predicated upon it being done a certain way in the book. And so I really thought it was fair game. And so I quite like that as well. It's easy to say cons when you're really being critical and a big sort of fan of the classic film. One of the biggest things that I had trouble with is that they, and I didn't mention this in the pros, but they essentially removed a number of escapes and scenes during the escapes and areas and locations and sets on this second film that were in the first. And so in some cases, they didn't completely remove them. They just maybe combined two different things just to have them there. And where in the first film, there was a lot of time dedicated to running through jungles and having like headhunters or bounty hunters, native bounty hunters come after them, and having Papillon have like go to this paradise like island where he like develops a relationship with a tribe and a chieftain. Like some of good parts of all of that is all but vanished, from this film. And those were beautiful scenes and beautiful locations that I really add to my experience of the first film. With this one, my understanding is that the majority of the film was shot in Europe, and in some cases, like probably Mediterranean, or I know, I believe Croatia was one spot that a number of it was filmed in. And the original film, although having certain scenes right on location where the prison was, in French Guiana, much of it was shot in Venezuela, Hawaii, and Jamaica, I believe. And it really shows on the original film. Like, you really see that sort of Caribbean, tropical sort of environment that is very noticeable and enjoyable and really adds to the film. This one focuses a bit differently, and you don't really get some of the broader shots and perspective that you got in the first film. And that was a little disappointing for me, because in some ways I would look forward to seeing some more of that actually in this film, and it didn't have it. I didn't mention this, but the new film does add, as positives, it does add actually an intro component to prior that's much longer and involved prior to being in prison. And then also an ending where they bring some more perspective on Papillon's life sort of after the other film ended, and like the way he brought his autobiography and where he lived like the rest of his life and things like that. They shot a little piece at the end. I liked both of those, so I thought those were really good. And so they took some things out. Overall, this movie was 2 hours and 15 minutes. The original was around 2.5 hours, so there were 15 minutes less, but it felt like a lot more. I think when you take that they added in the beginning and the end, and it was still 15 minutes less, it really shows you how much time they lost on some of the things I described. And so that was a bit of a negative for me in comparison. I guess the performance by Rami Malek, to be honest, he did a good job in the film, and I enjoy watching him as an actor. I suppose I set myself up for higher expectations on other things I've seen, and nothing really entirely jumped out at me in his role within Papillon 2017. There was nothing for me to just one thing to grab onto where I thought he just did like an outstanding performance. I like him in other stuff he's done much more, and so in some ways I set myself up for something where I think it ended up being okay and enjoyable, but not really outstanding. Whereas with Charlie Hunnam, I was actually a little bit more opposite, where I actually wasn't expecting as much, but I actually was quite pleased with the way he did the role. In addition to that, I found that, and this was an interesting thing, is that my understanding is that they really did try to push more in this film, the relationship between Papillon and Degas. And I found that by focusing more on the dialogue between them and some of the interpersonal stuff at the prison that happened between them, to try to solidify that further and explore it further. And they even refer to it as a love story between two inmates that sort of develop this companionship, friendship. It's completely, it's not a romantic relationship, but it's this sort of like really deep relationship that you would have with someone that you based your survival on for like so many years and just lived through hell together. And the way their approach was to focus on it through dialogue and through scenes like that, I think they meant to develop a stronger relationship, but for some reason, the high-adventure action 1970s film that I saw, even though there may have been less of that between Steve McQueen, who was probably a bit more the strong silent type than Charlie Hunnam, despite that, I found that the trials and tribulations that they showed in the original film made, in the end, what appeared to be a more realistic understanding of that deep relationship when all was said and done. Whereas trying to do it through dialogue, in the end, for whatever reason, I wasn't as convinced. And so it was good, and there were even some aspects to the way they shot Devil's Island in the end that was very different than the first one. I thought it was a very interesting take. It was completely different. And so there were some really pleasant differences just to see, in the sense that they're just purely differences, not one's better than the other. But I don't know, for me personally, that one piece that they were really trying to achieve, they really achieved that with me over and greater than the first film. So, overall, what I would say is this movie's less an action movie, despite what I said about the choreography, the fight choreography, than the original film. The original film was more of a high-adventure 70s film, where this one approaches more on the drama side. And even though there is action and adventure in it, it's much more of a dramatic film in the sense of its interaction between characters and things. I think that this film, the 2017 version, is a great film for fans of the book and the original movie that really want to see it again done in the current time period. I thought they did a good job with it. To give you as an example, I will buy it when it comes out to have it as part of my collection and rewatch it. I don't know how many times yet. That'll remain to be seen. But overall, I don't feel that it sort of does a disservice to the book or the original film. I think it tells it in a nice way, but definitely doesn't, despite the advantages of being 45 years later. I don't think it actually supersedes the first film. Okay, so with that, I'm going to take another drink here. So I wanted to talk about time management within hobbying, and this isn't so much me talking to try to instruct on time management or even talk too much about what I do, but I wanted to just really relay some thoughts just that I've been having regarding time management. You know, I find, and I've probably said this on the channel before, that miniature wargaming is probably one of the least conducive things you can do successfully if you jump into a lot of different games. It really, from its outset, unless it's a pre-painted product, it takes so much time to actually paint the stuff up. It takes so much time to set up new tables for terrain. It's just overall really time intensive. It makes it really hard to do multiple things. Now, as much as I try to limit doing multiple things, just as I've shown in my table update, I've got lots of things on the go. I've always got things in the queue, things that I want to do. And I had to ask myself recently, do I feel okay about taking shortcuts? What are shortcuts? And in some cases, they're not intentional shortcuts. In some cases, they're a bit more passive, and in some cases, they're a bit more of an active shortcut. Passive shortcuts to me might be something like getting into games because I want to, but they require no work, and they're still kind of tabletop games, like Star Wars X-Wing and Armada. It doesn't require me to paint anything, and in some ways it feels really good. As much as I know that I can paint those things, and I might even enjoy painting them, I enjoy the fact that I can focus on other things and have less to paint in my queue, and I can still enjoy that game. So in some ways it's a bit of what I would refer to as a passive shortcut on my hobby time in order to be able to game. Another passive shortcut might be buying like pre-painted terrain. I don't do a lot of that. I really do enjoy painting my own terrain, but you know, it is something that I would consider if I liked it. And you know, I might feel like, oh, I could have just bought a kit and done it myself, and that would have been a nice hobby project. How do I feel about that? I wouldn't say I feel guilty about things. It's just as much as, you know, how much of that do I want to do, and how much do I feel like I'm kind of, you know, taking a shortcut, you know, rather than just kind of doing it myself, like I know I can, and things like that. Another example would be, I have Zombicide, and I play Zombicide Black Plague with my family, and I just recently bought Massive Darkness. Funny story about that. I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but we spent a week at a sort of a vacation property, and a big plan was to actually play Zombicide that whole week in the evenings, and I focused on other things that we had to do for the trip, and I completely forgot to bring it. And the whole family was actually disappointed. And so after that, even though I never got onto the Massive Darkness Kickstarter, I was talking to my wife, and my wife likes Zombicide actually, and she likes the family dynamic we have when we play the game. And so she was like, well, we should, you know, get something else. And like I'd suggested, like we were just talking about bringing it to the cabin just to have it and leave it there, so we don't have to worry about packing something up and bringing it back and forth. Because it has all the expansions with Zombicide and other things too that I bring. It just ends up being a big like file box, you know, with the core game and everything else. So I picked up Massive Darkness, and it's so many miniatures, and you know, many of you I know paint it, and I know it's not impossible, but I have lots of other games that to paint. And when I got into Zombicide, as much as I still tell myself all the time I'd like to paint them, I've never painted it, and I've kind of given myself a pass on it. Like we just play with unpainted miniatures on the board game, and I just enjoy it. We enjoy it as a game, and it doesn't hit my painting table as another task to do, and it doesn't make my queue and just all the other stuff that I have unpainted get any bigger. And so it's kind of a bit of a shortcut for me, in a way of managing time, hobby time. It just opens up an area that I don't have to paint. I'm trying to think. So another thing is making terrain, and this is going to go to that area of the table that I have opened up earlier, and what I'm going to be putting on it. So terrain making I really enjoy, and I feel I've gotten better and better at it. There are some pieces for Savage Core, like some of the stalagmites, that I just really enjoy doing, and I think they came out excellent, and I'm kind of impressed. Like I impress myself sometimes with certain things. I spent not as much time on Saga, although I think the terrain came out very nice. It's fully been used, I mean, a lot since making it, and it does the job really well, and I think it looks good on the table. But it actually takes some time. I mean, it's, some things can be whipped up quite quick, but most of them require different stages and take a lot of time, and they take away from painting time. So recently, I saw a friend of mine that I game with and his ability to do some 3D printing. Now, this isn't a subject about 3D printing, but I'll just elaborate on it and how it comes into this time-saving piece. Because in some ways, 3D printing doesn't save time, and some it does. For me, at least. But I saw some progress that he had with a piece that he did with 3D printing, and I was quite impressed with it. And a couple of years ago, I was talking with my wife about 3D printing. She was kind of intrigued by the idea, which a lot of people are, I think, because it's not just used for gaming. But at the time, we were looking at a couple of $1,000s for something halfway decent, I believe, when you look back at least a couple of years ago. And it was just, that was not something that I was really willing to spend just, on a casual glance at it and just for what I thought I might be able to do with it. It was just, when you're looking at multi-$1,000 kind of thing, it was just never going to be the case. But really now, 3D printing, for the most part, I would say it's about the same as an investment in an airbrush, and that might really surprise some people. Because, I mean, you can get airbrushes and compressors. You can probably get in, I'm thinking Canadian dollars, but you can probably, if you look at US too, you can probably get into airbrushing with a compressor at 100 to 200 US Canadian, something like that. I mean, just depending on how much money you want to put into it. And it's pretty close to that. I mean, you're looking at like 250 US to 300 Canadian, like for an entry level, halfway pretty good 3D printer. And so that actually kind of made me look into it more, because now it's all of a sudden something that you can potentially look into. And the reason to some degree was when I saw how much terrain you could do with it. It wasn't really to print miniatures off. As much as there's some opportunity for that, that's normally what always comes up with the miniature wargaming discussion with Warhammer and things, is like, when are we going to be printing like Space Marines? Well, as much as that people are doing that already, to me, the real advantage was in the terrain. Now, you still have to paint the terrain if you want to paint it, and that will take time, just like it takes with doing any terrain. But for me, a big part of terrain making is the actual hobbying. Like the actual working with the plaster, and if like you were going to do, let's say, like a crashed rhino and like some sort of terrain piece, the painting is like the finalizing part. Like the beginning is all the modification and the hobbying. Now that stuff's really fun, don't get me wrong. But when you have like lots of like miniatures to paint and other things to do, that is just another slot into your hobby time. And I'm not trying to dissuade people from making their own terrain. Like I have primarily done that lately and to this point. But I do think after seeing some of the stuff with the 3D printing, you could just set a machine on and have some beautiful terrain pieces done for different types of games and different kinds of models that add to your scenery. And you'll have a starting point just to paint it and be done with it and have a really nice quality product. So to me, that was like, I started asking myself initially, like, do I see that as sort of not hobby cheating, but you could call it hobby cheating in the same way, in the way that some people do that, or is it just like really like taking a shortcut? And how do you feel about that, like yourself? And so I'm curious what you guys think. Like, I'm kind of over it in the sense that I'm still going to make my own terrain at times, and there's certain things I'm not going to be able to find files on, for 3D printing, and I don't see myself doing a lot of 3D modeling at this point. I think that there's a real skill in that, and it takes time to be able to do that kind of stuff. But I'm just curious, like, do you guys have your own things that you do to save time that you would almost consider to be a shortcut, regardless of the outcome? In many cases, shortcuts don't result in a worse outcome on the table, but sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But do you have examples where you kind of ask yourself, well, I used to do this all myself, so why am I doing this? It kind of also reminds me of, like, in some cases, studios that shoot bat reps and stuff, they will have other people paint their armies. Sometimes people have other people paint their armies, just gamers. But even as a hobbyist, there are times when you might spend a lot of your time, let's say, videoing bat reps because you're a content producer. is it acceptable to just have somebody paint your army for you then, you know, and not do the hobbying yourself, even though you like hobbying and you want to do that? Now, I don't bring that specific example up because I'm planning on doing that. Like, I am still planning on painting all my stuff, my armies. But, you know, I just bring it up as just another example. To me, it makes, it's like another way that somebody creates space, you know, to do what they want to do in the hobby or to support the hobby. And even though they like to do that activity, they create some time within their hobby to focus on other things. So I'm kind of interested. It's just been something that's been on my mind. I'm just interested in what you guys think. So this one might be a little bit of a short one. I'm just kind of brushing the dust off my Heresy hump days. So I hope you enjoy the two topics today and the little bit of a table and room update. And talk to you later. Wait, before I forget, this Thursday, Musty Wargamers, we're going to have a couple of new topics this week. Rusty and I are going to be hanging out in our first Season 2 episode, and it will be at 9 Central, 8 Mountain, 1 hour ahead for this episode, because I have some stuff with kids to do, and that's just the only time I could do it this week, and Rusty was able to accommodate me. So, please, if you're interested in hanging out with us, join live, and feel free to throw some comments in. Otherwise, you're also welcome to watch the video later. Take care.